Right, let's talk about Donald Trump, shall we? He says he's going to hand himself in to be arrested tomorrow in Georgia on those charges relating to attempts to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election.
Well, the former president is likely to have fingerprints taken and a mugshot before being released then on bail.
But the arrest is going to follow the first Republican presidential nomination debate tonight, which Trump will not be attending, despite currently leading in the polls.
You see, why should he attend it?
Well, because it's for all the nomination candidates. He should be there debating.
Everybody knows who he is. He's going to stand with Joe Miggins and Fred Bloggs and Mary Smith and whatever and trying to say, hi, I'd like to be the president of the United States.
Well, there is an argument to say that, you know, he blocks out the sun in many ways, and actually allowing the others to have their chance to be heard is a good thing. Let's discuss all of this with the Professor of US Politics, Scott Lucas, and the political commentator, Steve Gill. Steve, first of all, let's start with you. Is it a loss for this debate that Trump won't be attending? We know he's doing his own one with Tucker Carlson on Twitter at the same time.
Yeah, I think he's going to be drawing a lot of eyeballs away from Fox News to the interview with Tucker Carlson. But unfortunately, I think for him, he's drawing the eyeballs that already support him. He's at about 42%, I think, in most of the early primaries and caucuses. That means about 58% of Republicans aren't with him yet. If I was one of his advisors, I'd want him with the rest of the candidates, trying to win some of those other candidates' votes to himself, rather than just talking to people who are already supporting him. As Eamon mentioned, it's a good political strategy to say, look, I'm ahead, I don't need to be there. But I like to see candidates debate, show that they ought to be the next nominee. And I kind of like to go after those votes I don't already have.
Yeah, I suppose, Steve, it's like him saying, these people are insignificant compared to me. I've been there, I've done it, I've got the T-shirt.
Well, then go show that. And I think these other candidates are going to be making a big mistake if they only focus on Donald Trump. Many of them are only in single digits in the polling. They've got to get closer to Donald Trump so that it becomes a one or two person race. Right now, I think Ron DeSantis is usually in about 20% in the polls. Everybody else is in single digits. They got to focus on showing the voters they're the one that ought to be toe-to-toe with Trump. And right now, I think Trump has a lot of inevitability of being the nominee that gives him a lead. If somebody can get into that 40% margin like him, I think that takes away that inevitability and may make it possible for somebody to catch him.
Let's bring in Scott Lucas in all of this. There was a big poll in Iowa on Monday, which is a critical early voting state, and it showed him 20 points ahead, which is possibly why he's decided not to get involved in this debate. As Eamon says, why? It's not worth it for him. That being said, he's going to hand himself to being in to be arrested shortly after the debate. Will that hurt him or will it help him?
Oh, well, first, an important point about that Iowa poll, Trump is slipping in Iowa after both the federal indictments, which were early this month over the attempt to overturn the 2020 election, and then the Georgia indictments. He was at the mid-50s in Iowa. He's now down to around about 42, as Steve pointed out. And I think that, look, in terms of what the arrest does, look, Trump's tactic will be for you to keep talking about him, as you put it so well, Isabel, to block out the sun. Trump's tactic will be to push the disinformation, push the diversions by attacking the jury, by attacking the judge, by attacking the prosecutors, of course, by attacking liberals, rather than dealing with the facts of the case. So I think it's important for journalists and analysts like Steve and myself to deal with the facts of the case, what's going to take place in Georgia, and not put our thumbs on the scales by saying, oh, here's where the political process comes in. Let the politics unwind where they are going to, but let's stick to the fact that we've got these 4 indictments with 91 felony charges, serious felony charges, and not try to diverse or try to bury what's happening there.
So are you saying, Scott, that no matter what happens in the debate, it's more than likely not to be talked about the next day because the only show in town the next day is Trump's mugshot?
Actually, I'm saying something which is related not just to the legal process, but the way that the debate is not being covered, at least by some outlets. With respect to Eamon, and I know it was a good line, this isn't just Joe Miggins who's showing up tonight. This is the former Vice President Mike Pence, former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley. We're talking about Ron DeSantis, the Florida governor, talking about the first major black candidate to run for the Republican nomination, Senator Tim Scott. These are very significant politicians, but what Trump has done successfully so far is led the media by the nose and not have them talk about the other candidates and not have them talk, importantly, about the issues. issues like women's rights, LGBT rights, the economy. And that's why he's doing quite well in the polls, is partly because he's able to call the tune. He's still the ringmaster of the circus.
Yeah, and do you accept that, Steve?
Yeah, I think that he ought to be talking more about the issues. I would add two other names to the list of who to watch in the debate tonight. One is the governor of North Dakota. Most people haven't heard of, Burgum. The other is Vivek Ramaswamy. We've been talking a little bit about India and the trade opportunities there. Burgum and Ramaswamy have a lot of charisma. They have a lot to talk about their own successes, both personally as well as what Burgum has done as a business guy and in North Dakota. These cast of characters, as Scott pointed out, they have a lot to point to of what they've done and why they would be the good nominee against Joe Biden or whoever ends up emerging on the other side. And I think that if they're smart, they won't talk as much about Trump, but they'll try to distinguish themselves from each other and point to what they would do differently. I think the economy, as Scott mentioned, is the key issue. Bidenomics is not working, and I think most people are feeling the pain in the economy. They ought to be talking about what they will do to put us back on track economically, and that's going to win some voters to them and, again, may get them closer to Donald Trump and let somebody emerge, or two somebodies emerge as the real alternatives to him. Most everybody else is in single digits. And Asa Hutchinson, who's a former governor of Arkansas, Chris Christie, they really have no shot. Some of these others may.
Steve, I want to ask you a question. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but in the back of my head, you were involved in trade deals with the USA under the Clinton administration. Good man, good. You're the very guy. How significant, we're talking today on the programme, the UK government is talking about this significant, this deal with India, this trade deal post-Brexit. What would it take to make a difference, or what do you think about this? Or is the USA the only country in town, really, to do a trade deal with?
Well, I was actually director of intergovernmental affairs for the U.S. Trade Representative under both President Bush, first Bush, and for Bill Clinton for a while. I like your term ginormous, because I think it's not just a ginormous deal in terms of what it opens up with India, but it does put out the open for business sign and can lead to other trade deals that, as you collect other ones, do become significant and be a bigger part of the percentage. I think when you look at the details, it's not as much going to be the immigration issues or those. It's what do they have that Britons want to buy? What does Britain produce that they may want to buy? And a lot of it's going to be information technology. A lot of it's going to be the creativity of new products and new initiatives. And I think that's what Britain can offer. And I think there's some of that on the Indian side as well, the technology that they're producing, like their effort to go to the moon.
Yeah, well, that's a whole other story. That is a. But Scott, is the most important thing for the UK to get the foot in the door, to keep that door wedged open? And as Steve was saying, then it relates to things that I hadn't even thought about, like the moon technology.
Well, the most important thing for the government is to try to convince you that they got their foot firmly in the door today. I'm sorry, just a bit of a reality check. First of all, the government had said this entire deal was going to be finished by the end of 2022. Now they have gotten, and it is significant in those sectors, the issues over cars and whiskey. But that's not a comprehensive trade deal. It doesn't cover manufacturing. It doesn't cover agriculture. And while Steve's right that those are fundamentals, immigration is going to come up here, because what the Indians want, and one of the reasons why the deal hasn't come about, is they want guarantees on high-skill work visas and on student visas. And because of the approach that the Home Secretary is taking, Suella Braverman, she wants to cut precisely those visas across the board, which means you got a long way to go within the government in terms of how they proceed, let alone completing these negotiations.
Do you think, just finally, sort of whilst we're on a bit of geopolitics, there's another big summit going on at the moment where Russia and India are both attending. And I wonder if, stronger links with the UK pulls India away from Russia, because there's been some criticism of India, in some ways helping to fund the Russian war machine. Is this going to bring them back into sort of the West, the fold with the West in some way?
Look, first of all, we're talking about what's called the BRICS Summit. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. I've heard about this for 20 years. BRICS basically is a talking shop posing as an alliance. These countries have very divergent interests. So already, remember, India is part of the Quad with Australia, Japan, and the US on economic and security matters. India is very, very skeptical of China, which has invaded it in the past. So I think India itself is keeping its distance, including from Vladimir Putin, whose Ukraine invasion isn't going very well. The trade deal, look, if it came off, that would add to it, but it's not necessary for India to be making its own way apart from Moscow and indeed apart from Beijing at this point.